Good evening, Californians. Red Star Report is back. February 1st, 2022. Podcast number 1 of Season 2. And this is Voices for the California Nation. All I can say is, holy shit, people. Can you Red Star Rebels believe what's happened while we were away? I mean, we're already seeing a triple-edged sword of American election year crazy. And this 2022 version of stupid is just getting started. First, everyone's accusing everyone else of divisiveness. And every biased media outlet and every politician from both major U.S. political parties are still talking about unity. The need for America to somehow come together while they keep saying and doing the same things that are driving the USA to Civil War 2.0. Oh, and that's only when they're acting like they're surprised about the inevitability of that Civil War, which really comes as no surprise to the California independence movement. After all, we've been saying this would be the outcome of the American rights flirtation with fascism for the last 4 years. Red Star Rebels. There's even a comic book about this shit. Congressional Democrats have the January 6th Commission in full swing, with some arrests and some prosecutions and a few people in jail. But it's pretty hard not to notice that none of the rich and powerful people who actually planned and executed that so-called insurrection have even been arrested yet. So the first edge of this weird triple-edged sword is this unfucking believable American psychosis that pretends everything is still okay in the good old USA. It's like an entire orchestra of governmental Neros fiddling while the country burns. And this insane notion that despite all common sense, if Californians just keep voting blue, everything will somehow be all right. Oh, just ignore everything as Red State America prepares itself to become the fourth fucking Reich. These divisions can't really be as bad as they actually are, can they? Oh, can't we just close our eyes and if we believe hard enough, America's militant left and right can magically come together and sing Kumbaya in a center that has proven it can't hold and that both sides equally despise? All this coming from a broken U.S. political structure that on its best days for the last 20 years couldn't order pizza. Brings up the question, why is any Californian not considering California independence? Because if you go by America's polarized political track record, we Californians already know the United States won't be able to solve any of its monumental problems for generations. A recent case in point brings us to the second edge of this three-edged sword, because it's really not just in my imagination, is it? After all that media effort, all that money, all that blue no matter who bullshit to get Joe Biden elected president with razor-thin Democratic majorities in Congress back in 2020, all Californians have to show for it is a steaming pile of absolute legislative failure. Climate change, gun control, universal health care, drug prices, mask mandates, and, of course, Build Back Better, and finally, the death of democracy itself with the failure to pass the Voting Rights Initiative. As a California secessionist, it's tempting to just point out the stupidity of the whole Joe Manchin Kristen Sinema thing and lay all the blame at the door of the National Democratic Party. I could rail about the arrogance, impotence, incompetence, or whatever other ants we in the California independence movement think is appropriate at this moment. But that's only half the story, isn't it? How can a Californian look at the national government's dysfunction and not call out the anti-California neo-fascists calling themselves the Republican Party? If Democrats have failed to govern, Republicans have refused to govern. Those fascists prefer to play political games in the face of an environmental catastrophe, a global pandemic, rising homelessness, economic hardship, and so on, all while working a political power play to kill U.S. democracy while they still call themselves the true American patriots. Honestly, at this point, if Californians are even halfway paying attention, I'd have to ask why we don't already have 40 million Californians screaming for independence. Why would any true Californian want to be part of this kind of USA, considering California independence is the better alternative? And that brings me to the third edge of this triple-edged sword. Somehow, with all this going on, the Biden administration is actually trying to spin this U.S. governmental grade A shit show as an administration doing a great job. Americans are struggling while they celebrate the stock market skyrocketing and ignore homelessness exploding. They celebrate vaccination rates as COVID-19 spikes to new records across the country, and a corrupted Supreme Court shoots down their mask mandates. They celebrate record low unemployment and ignore the depression and desperation of people who are working but still have to make decisions between rent, electricity, and food. Are we really celebrating the record number of American billionaires while ignoring the record number of American children living in poverty? The real truth here is prices are rising, shelves are emptying, and people are becoming desperate and scared. Even as Californians are now arming themselves up against their neighbors, America loses faith in this broken, beyond all repair U.S. government that seems incapable or unwilling to solve anything about anything that might possibly inconvenience the ruling donor class. So Red Star Report is back. And our message for podcast 1 of season 2 is this simple, honest statement. Get ready, Red Star Rebels. 2022 is going to be a bumpy ride. But at least now we know that California independence is now the most viable option left to save at least some form of democracy for the people of California. This is Voices for the California Nation. Next up, we welcome back Matt Owen as our first Red Star contributor for 2022. Historically insightful, and yes, even controversial, Matt often brings food for thought to discussions starred for differing perspectives. As Californians, to listen and then agree or disagree is the nature of good political discourse. This is Red Star Rising with Matt Owen.
Hello, everyone. In a previous video, I talked about the distinctness of socialism with California values. And it occurs to me that we've been here before. we did, in fact, in the teeth of the Great Depression, offer such a socialism in the face of other competing socialisms that today probably wouldn't be recognized as such. The time was the Great Depression, and it started with a financial crash and ended up seriously setting back the world's capitalist economy so badly that in the Soviet Union, their new economic policy faltered. Their engagement with the capitalist world market faltered because that capitalist world market faltered. So what was left? Well, in Germany, a demagogue by the name of Adolf Hitler offered something he called National Socialism, but it became very immediately evident that this was, in fact, a German version of Italy's fascism. He knew it. Mussolini knew it. Everybody knew it. He just used the term to draw millions of Germans to his cause. Meanwhile, what replaced the NEP in the Soviet Union was something that Stalin called socialism in one country. He turned his back on internationalism, and he empowered his bureaucracy at the expense of Soviet democracy. So socialism wasn't exactly getting a good name, but capitalism was in ruins. Well, this threw leaders around the world into a loop because it threatened them all, okay? As well as the majority in every country. It threatened the leaders because it threatened the majority, and the majority was in a mood to strike back. In the U.S., you had FDR casting about for anything that would beat the Depression. And he himself said, we'll try this, and if it doesn't work, we'll try something else, and we'll keep trying until we find something that works. That something, or a series of policies, came to be known as the New Deal. Until World War II came along, and the U.S. was dragged kicking and screaming into it. So what was happening in California? Well, we were experiencing the same problems as the U.S. was. But in 1934, our gubernatorial candidate, a socialist by the name of Upton Sinclair, did manage to capture the Democratic nomination for governor. And unlike FDR, who was just gassing about for just anything, Sinclair had a plan that he promulgated through his EPIC clubs, End Poverty in California. And to do that, he envisioned 3 new entities. The first would be California Authority for Land, that would turn unused farmland over to farmers fleeing from other areas whose farms were going under. They could reestablish themselves on unused farms thanks to the California Authority for Land. The second was the California Authority for Production, okay, that would employ people at shut down factories. It would open them back up and employ people there, California Authority for Production. And the third element was the California Authority for Money, which was supposed to pay for the first 2. Okay, so that was what Upton Sinclair had in mind. Today, in the 21st century, we find ourselves in a different sort of crisis. One wouldn't exactly call it a Great Depression, but it is the 6th mass extinction, which is far worse. Okay. The changes in policies have to go deeper than they did in the case of end poverty in California. Because if not, it is we humans who will be ended. Okay. So let's see if we can come up with a 21st century version of the EPIC plan. First thing is the authority for land. It resides with those whose land it is and was stolen. They are the ones who have the authority on the land, and we need to restore that. When you look at what Sinclair had in mind for his California authority on land, it was modeled actually on the Mexican ejido system, which was, until 1994, enshrined in Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution. So we can restore that. Okay, the two Baja states can restore it. Alta can incorporate it. And that gives us the authority to return the land, take existing housing stock and redistribute it such that we can end homelessness. Indeed, we can use the property tax system to end homelessness. So we have very real expansions, if you would, concretizations of Upton Sinclair's California for land. California Authority for Production. Well, we're not in a Great Depression, although that could happen at any time. We are in a crisis, economic crisis compounded or compounding a crisis of survival as a species due to climate change. So our authority for production would have to, not so much fire up shut down factories, of which there aren't that many, but rather repurpose existing plants to build what it is we need. Okay. We look at the experiment that took place in Chile in the early 1970s with Checo, which was a concretization using 1970s technology, no less, of Professor Stafford Beer's Project Cybersyn. And we go, well, what about Calico? That is to say, our Project Cybersyn. Goodness knows Silicon Valley is right here. And we could do it a lot more effectively as far as coming up with and implementing economic planning here than they could in Chile using 1970s technology. So coming up with Calico, CyberNet Calico, as our California Authority on Production should be no problem. Again, we're not trying to control everything. We are just trying to repurpose production. Third part of the E.P.I.C plan, California Authority for Money. That would be our public bank. And we are on record as favoring such a bank, especially since it would be an absolute necessity to back our currency with it, back our money. I actually wrote something I called the Sustainable Development Initiative, a ballot proposition to take the charter of the Bank of North Dakota and translate it into Californian so it would fit into our Constitution. So all three parts, the California Authority for land, for production, for money, we can carry forward and deepen in the 21st century. So definitely we can show the world what socialism with California values is all about. Viva Gran California Libre. Workers of the world, unite.
Thank you, Matt. Given the obvious parallels, I've always thought Upton Sinclair and the progressive era of the 1930s in California is one of the most interesting and under-considered portions of California history. Much of modern America's hatred for California progressive values actually began during that time. Check it out for yourselves. 100 years of the same old anti-California propaganda. Amazing. Now, let's go to Activism in Action with Shankar Singham.
country, folks. This is California.
What's up, Californians? Shankar Singham here with Activism in Action, coming at you from a occupied California, once the free nation of California and soon to be again. So I'm here to talk about the greatest activist of all time, the GOAT activist, MLK. Now, he was okay. He was okay for his time. He was the GOAT, though. He came through with a lot of things for minorities. But listen to this. He was always hated by 70% of the American public. Hated him, didn't believe in him and whatnot. Okay. So you got to ask yourself, what the fuck happened, right? How come people hate him? 70% of the country, they hate a guy, but yet now they have a statue of him. Every member in the U.S. Congress is talking about him, singing his praises, quoting the one speech that they know. And it's an absolute fucking ridiculous joke. They quote the one speech that they know while they rip away voting rights from all of the Americans over there. And it's an absolute joke. I hope that isn't happening here in California. I know that's not happening here in California. But it's a shame that it's happening in the rest of the states. And again, this state, the Cali will have once again have to carry the liberal agenda, the progressive agenda, the leftist agenda across the United States again, folks. So let's talk about Martin Luther King, though, and why he was 70% of Americans hated him. They hated him because he went from civil rights into anti-war, and then the war on poverty. In fact, Lyndon B. Johnson, who was pissed at him, said, "Man, I gave him." He said, "Let me quote you from what Lyndon B. Johnson, the president of the United States at the time, said, what is that goddamn nigger preacher doing to me?" Okay. Because Lyndon B. Johnson just gave him the Voting Rights Act, just gave him the Civil Rights Act, just declared a war on poverty, everything that Martin Luther King wanted from the President Johnson delivers. But, hey, what is that damn nigger doing to me? Right? You couldn't figure it out right there. You just fucking said it, asshole. You just fucking said it, man. As much shit as they piled on and laws they enacted, that motherfucker was still a racist son of a bitch at the bone. And that's what we're dealing with today, folks. Because people don't see the blatant racism that's happening. They don't see it. And so they'll groups like Black Lives Matter hated. You know what? Let's compare Black Lives Matter and Martin Luther King and see what's up here. Because there were polls done back in the day, 1963, and let's do polls today. So in 1963, 41% of Americans viewed Martin Luther King in a positive light. 41%. 37% looked at him in a negative light. Bad Martin Luther King, right? Black Lives Matter, 2016. 40% of Americans looked at Black Lives Matter positive. Great, we support it. 28% looked at Black Lives Matter negative, right? Don't like it, don't know what they're about. In fact, another 28% didn't even know who Black Lives Matter was. You got 40% positive, 28% didn't like, another 28% didn't know who the fuck Black Lives Matter were. Fast forward 1966, 32% of Americans looked at Martin Luther King in a positive light, while 63% looked at him in a negative light. 63%. Wow, his numbers jumped up in 3 years and 2 years before his assassination. His numbers jumped up to 63%. Looked at him in a negative light, and finished off when he got assassinated, it was 70%. Let's look at Black Lives Matter. In 2020, 44% of Americans support Black Lives Matter. 43% oppose or look at Black Lives Matter in a negative light. It went from 28% negative in 2016 to 43%. It went up. Why? 11% said it didn't matter to them. Black Lives Matter, he can support or oppose. And that 11% is who I want to talk to right now, because that is just absolute bullshit. Obviously, as more people found out about Black Lives Matter, they hated him. And 11%, they don't give a shit about black people. They're just as racist as that 43% who oppose them. Why? Because they may think that they're not a racist, but they're not anti-racist. And what is anti-racist? Anti-racist is what every Californian needs to be. That's what this state needs to be about. Anti-racist. Zero tolerance for that shit. I mean, MLK came out, that's great. But this state comes out with the Black Panther Party. This state comes out with Black Lives Matter. That's what this state does. So we got to be anti-racist, okay? And what does that mean? It means, I don't have to explain that to you guys. I mean, if If I need to tell you what an anti-racist is, then you don't know what racist is. Reparations, you shouldn't have a problem with that. If you're white and you get offended by honky or cracker, you're lying. You're not offended. That doesn't mean shit to you. You weren't in shackles, working on the fields in chains, being called a honky. So that's what you got to be, anti-racist. This 11%, racist. So this is the United States, folks. 44% support Black Lives Matter, and 61% oppose Black Lives Matter. Those are the same numbers MLK had right when he got assassinated. Isn't that funny? Nothing's fucking changed in the USA today. Yippee-ki-yay. That's all I got for you folks. You guys stay tuned, stay alert, and hang on for the next episode of Red Star Report. Shankar Singham, Activism in Action. I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you, Shankar. Boom. Wow. Welcome back. I got to follow that. Let's go to talking points. This is Talking Points. So, let's get into it. For the first talking point of Season 2, let's tap an obvious follow-up question to the talking points from Season 1. Question: what will it take to convince the majority of Californians of the need for independence? Well, we've already talked about the whole California as a donor state thing. That point is already a well-accepted truth, which usually leads to the taxation without representation talking point, where we explain that California's 40 million people are constitutionally underrepresented in the Electoral College and the Senate, which means the voice of California voters is all but silenced. That is also undeniable. And of course, we can't forget the nation-state part of the argument that goes, California is already the 5th largest economy in the world, so an independent California nation will automatically qualify for a seat at the table among the G8 countries of the world. And California will become a major player in the arguments over climate change negotiations. We've discussed how California is not only politically different with its progressive California values, but we've also discussed the social and cultural differences between California and the rest of the United States. Again, all that is undeniable. If you go one by one down these talking points, all of which answer what we see as the FAQ things, the frequently answered questions about California independence, it starts to become very clear that California independence already has more value right now than remaining with the United States. It becomes a 2 + 2 = 4 discussion, daring people who want to argue against California independence to convince you that the facts are wrong. So, if just making an argument in favor of an independent California republic was enough to make it actually happen, we'd already be there. So what will it take to convince the majority of Californians of the need for independence? How do you convince people to support California independence when the facts are already there and they're still not ready to be convinced? The second part of this talking point discussion goes, most polls we see already indicate that somewhere between 33% and 47% of Californians are not opposed to the idea of California as an independent nation. Then this notion becomes real when we hear people like Governor Gavin Newsom and even Jerry Brown before him talking about California as a nation state. But still, Most of the people of California don't seem to pick up on this yet. It's almost like we've had two governors in a row who are trying to get Californians used to the idea of California acting like a country instead of a state. Almost. You would think this is enough in itself, but California independence faces an uphill battle still. Even if the facts are on our side, the dream of California independence struggles against a nostalgia for an American dream that either ceased to exist long ago or was never a reality for most Californians in the first place. What will it take to convince the majority of Californians of the need for independence? Well, with the facts on our side and poll numbers that are increasing for the acceptance of the idea of independence, and with California governors tossing around words like nation state, you would think the only thing left to make independence a reality would be a series of grossly apparent U.S. failures. Failures like an inability to fight a global pandemic, failure to secure basic fundamental human rights, crumbling infrastructure, climate change, or an electoral process that's openly being corrupted to end democracy. You know, things that would indicate some sort of collapse of the United States as we know it. And wait, that's a thing too, right? So, what's the answer here? Talking point. What will it take to convince the majority of Californians of the need for independence? Well, time is the first part of this answer. The California independence movement says independence is inevitable, and there's nothing indicating that isn't the case. The California independence movement has no expiration date. But obviously, it will take time for Californians to both become more and more disenchanted with the idea of remaining in the United States and more comfortable with the idea of California as an independent country. That short of just a complete collapse of the United States, that is. Bringing us to the second requirement for an answer. The answer here is you. The quote goes, my quote goes, I'm done with laid-back Californians. I want Californians as arrogant in defense of California as Americans are vindictive about trying to tear California down. I want Californians to stand proud, speak loud, and stop pretending that being called elitist by America's willfully ignorant is anything we were ever ashamed of. The truth is, it will take California rebels like you talking to people, reaching out to Californians and making your voices heard. Californians owning it by proudly telling people about California independence because that's how grassroots movements work. What will convince the majority of Californians of the need for California independence? Californians like you, normalizing the arguments for California independence. Californians actually talking to their family and friends, sharing the California independence movement's ideas and ideals. Oh, and hey, while you're at it, you could share Red Star Report. There's a good start. Because as more Californians keep openly talking about independence, the more Californians become used to the idea and become convinced that they can start talking about it. Then they convince more Californians to start talking about it. And eventually, spoiler alert, a majority of Californians are talking about it. That's how California independence becomes accepted as the will of the California people. In these darkening times, that's how California independence becomes the shining beacon and accepted viable alternative to everything that's going wrong in America today. What will convince the majority of Californians of the need for California independence? Answer: it will take time, and it will take you. This is Talking Points. That's Red Star Report, Podcast 1 of 2022. I'd like to take this moment to thank our Red Star Rebel content contributors. 2022 will feature more voices for the California nation. So as always, I invite you to check out our website at www.redstarreport.com. Be sure to subscribe to our Red Star Report YouTube channel now. Go find our Red Star Report Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, etc., etc. Because if you want a real California Independence Movement media group, it's all about the algorithms. Thank you to all our Red Star Rebels for watching. We are Red Star Report.